This is the story of David, a young man living in the sleepy, fog-drenched town of Oakhaven, America. It was October 31st, Halloween. The entire town was alive with an electric energy. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on every porch, grinning with jagged teeth. But in Oakhaven, Halloween wasn't just about candy and costumes. The locals held a deep, ancient belief. On this one night, the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. They believed a spectral passage opens, allowing the spirits of the departed, beloved family members, brave soldiers who fell in battle, and souls who changed the world to cross over and visit their loved ones one last time. David usually loved this tradition, but this year a knot of dread tightened in his stomach. His uncle Anderson had invited him for dinner. David hadn't visited the old Victorian house on the hill in 4 years, not since his Aunt Joanna vanished without a trace. The police had found nothing, and Uncle Anderson had descended into a reclusive madness, cutting off all ties with the family. David never really liked his uncle. The man was cold and stern, but he had adored Aunt Joanna. She was the light of that dark house, always greeting him with warm hugs and the smell of pumpkin pie. Driven by a mix of guilt and curiosity, David decided to finally accept the invitation. He wanted to check on the old man's health, but deep down, he was hoping for closure regarding his aunt. The house on the hill. When David pulled up to the driveway, his heart sank. The house, once pristine, was now a rotting shell. The windows were grime-streaked like cataracts, and the garden was choked with dead, gray weeds. It looked like the house itself was dying. Uncle Anderson opened the door, and David barely recognized him. The man was skeletal. His skin was pale and waxy, and his eyes were wide, bloodshot, and unblinking. It looked as if he hadn't slept since the day Joanna went missing. "David," Anderson rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "You came." The interior was suffocating. Every window was draped in heavy black curtains. The only source of light was a single naked bulb swaying on a wire in the hallway, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to reach out for David. David felt an immediate urge to run, but he forced a smile. "Happy Halloween, Uncle." They sat in the living room, the silence heavy and oppressive. Just as David began to ask about Anderson's health, a sound echoed from the back of the house. Clang, chop, clang. It was coming from the kitchen, the unmistakable sound of a knife hitting a cutting board. The smell of cooking, something rich, but with an underlying scent of something spoiled, wafted through the air. David froze. "Uncle, is there someone else here? A cook?" Anderson stared blankly. "No, we are alone, just us. But I hear—" Suddenly, the single light bulb above them hissed. It flared bright white, then dimmed, then flickered violently. The temperature in the room plummeted. David could see his own breath misting in the air. "I need to check the fuse," Anderson muttered, standing up abruptly and shuffling into the darkness of the hallway, leaving David alone in the flickering gloom. The whisper. David sat trembling in the semi-darkness. Then he heard it, a voice right beside his ear. "David!" He spun around. No one was there. "I waited so long for you. Why didn't you come earlier?" The voice was filled with an agonizing sorrow. It was a voice he knew. "Aunt Joanna," he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Help me!" The light bulb gave one final violent pop, and in that split second of stroboscopic light, David saw her. Standing at the end of the hall was a smudged, ethereal figure. It was Joanna, but she looked wrong. Her face was twisted in pain, her spectral hand pointing toward the floor. She drifted backward, floating through the closed door of the basement. Terrified but driven by a supernatural pull, David followed. He opened the basement door. The air that rushed up met him was putrid, the smell of copper and rotting meat. "Auntie?" he called out. The figure shimmered at the bottom of the stairs and vanished into the shadows. David descended, his phone flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The altar. What he found at the bottom made his blood run cold. The basement had been converted into a temple of nightmares. Strange symbols were scrawled on the walls in blood. In the center of the room stood a terrifying obsidian idol, a statue of Satan, horned and leering. But it was what lay at the foot of the idol that broke David. 4 piles of bones and decaying flesh. He recognized the tatters of a dress on the oldest, most decomposed body. It was Aunt Joanna. Beside her were 3 others, fresh victims. David realized with horror that these were the missing persons from the town over the last few years. 1 body for every Halloween since she disappeared. David retched, dizziness overtaking him. He turned to run, to scream, to call the police, but the world spun. A heavy blow struck the back of his head. Blackness, the ritual. David woke up to a splitting headache. He tried to move, but his hands and feet were bound tight to a wooden chair. He was still in the basement. The idol of Satan loomed over him, lit by black candles. Uncle Anderson stood before him, holding a jagged ceremonial dagger. He wasn't the frail old man anymore. He was manic, energized by insanity. He was chanting in a guttural foreign language that hurt David's ears. "Why?" David screamed, struggling against the ropes. "She was your wife." Anderson stopped chanting and looked at David with dead eyes. "Immortality, David. The Dark Lord requires a soul every All Hallows Eve. Joanna was the first. She gave me power, but the power fades. It needs to be renewed." He raised the dagger. "And family blood. Family blood is the most potent of all." David squeezed his eyes shut. "This is it," he thought. "I'm going to die here." Crash! The basement door splintered inward. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Anderson spun around, shrieking in rage. But it was too late. Officers swarmed the basement, tackling the madman to the cold concrete floor. The aftermath, David was rushed out of the house, gasping the fresh, cool night air. He learned later that he hadn't fully fainted before. He had managed to dial 911 in his pocket just as he saw the bodies, leaving the line open. The dispatcher had heard the screams. The investigation revealed the gruesome truth. Anderson had been sacrificing a person every Halloween to achieve eternal life. If not for the ghostly intervention of Aunt Joanna, leading David to the bodies, David would have been the 5th victim, and Anderson might never have been caught. David ensured Aunt Joanna and the other victims were given a proper, dignified burial, finally putting their souls to rest. He never forgot that night. The thin veil had saved his life. Now, every Halloween, David doesn't hide. He honors the dead by celebrating life, volunteering at shelters and helping the community, ensuring that light always conquers the darkness. If this story sent a chill down your spine, hit that like button. Subscribe now for more awesome horror videos like this, and tell us in the comments, do you believe spirits come back on Halloween?